Welcome to The Founder's Mind, a podcast powered by the Kadar Group. This is your host, Adam Muchler. Before we kick off the conversation with Greg, if you've had a chance to listen to some recent episodes, you may have heard we're bringing on a sponsor for the show, and we couldn't be more hyped to share the news. We're currently producing Season 2, sponsored by Upside Business Travel. More on all of this soon. And now, the interview with Greg, founder of ReadMe. From brutally honest answers in job interviews early on in his career to creating ReadMe and growing a SaaS business, we cover a lot of ground. And now, Greg. Welcome to The Founder's Mind. I have Greg on the show with me today. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to diving in. I always think to myself, what intro can I do? What can I say to really, introduce a guest? But I think my words pale into comparison for your own. So I'd love to hear in your words, what are you up to? What are you working on? Where's your energy focus these days?
Definitely. So I can answer that two different ways. The first is I have a company. It's called ReadMe. We do API documentation. That's my 100% or 110% thing. And then on the side, and I think this is kind of relevant to the podcast, is I really like startup culture and startups and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time on, I think one thing that we've kind of missed or lost over the past few years is that startups are really cool and fun and we get to do some awesome stuff. And, the product that we build, API documentation, I love it. I can talk about that for hours as well. But I also really love just Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And I know you're in DC, but so I don't want to say San Francisco is a physical location, but more of a kind of mentality. And
San Francisco is a mentality.
Well, that's probably a location, but it's a little cheaper if you take the mentality elsewhere, I think. But just kind of the excitement of being able to build startups and kind of think about culture and things like that. So on top of having ReadMe, I run a startup themed escape room. It's a parody of that. I write a lot about startup culture and stuff like that. So I think those are the kind of two things I would describe myself as.
I love it. Well, you said a lot of things, which is great, and you're doing a lot of things. Not all listeners are as dialed into, sort of like the stereotypical startup culture or tech. So talk to us a little bit about ReadMe and this API sort of hand guide that you've built and the platform that you're working on. And then I'd love to talk more about startup culture in general and the startup escape room. I'm imagining that there is some sort of, running in the hamster wheel of investment and getting out of that and other things.
Yes. So API documentation or APIs, for people who don't know, are every company has one. It's how companies talk to other companies. It's kind of a semi-standardized way for any two companies you like that to pass data between each other. So if you ever are using Yelp, for example, and you see a call an Uber link or call a Lyft link and you click it, that's using an API. If you ever log into a website using Facebook and it knows who your friends are and it knows who you are, that uses an API. If you're ever at a restaurant like McDonald's and you see a Coca-Cola device where one of those smart ones where you can pick your different things and combine drinks and stuff like that. And there's a touch screen. You can actually log into it. That uses an API. And that's how McDonald's and Coca-Cola work together. And all those companies I just mentioned are our customers as well. And so basically what we do and how we get in the API space is we help people understand how to use APIs. So people still build their APIs their own way. What we do is we surface how to do it. We show people we when they need help, we get them help. When things are going badly, we kind of show how to fix things. We help them get started. We help them get their API keys, which is kind of like a password for APIs, so you can get started with it. We're basically kind of the APIs are kind of this conceptual thing, I guess. They do exist, but you can't really look at them or play with them. We're the UX UI on top of it. Is kind of how I describe it.
That's awesome. And this is something that you've been working on for 3 to 4 years, 5 years?
Yeah, almost 5 years, and maybe 10 if you include all the years of thinking about it and wanting to do it and not doing it and trying to raise money and failing and doing something else and coming back to it. But it's been about 5 years full time.
So I think that's a great point, and I know that this is a part of your story. When was the first time you thought about the sort of V1 of the company you've built with ReadMe?
Yeah, so it's 2019, almost 2020 now. And my first job in San Francisco was in 2008 at a startup. And we built an API and we needed documentation, and it was something that is pretty standard. It's not, if you go to 10 different APIs, they're all pretty similar, like documentation. It's almost like going to a blog. The content's different, the colors are different, it looks different, but you don't need to start from scratch and build your own blog. You just use WordPress or Squarespace or one of those, because there's so many things that are in common between all of them. So it just seemed obvious that there should be some easy way to document your API. And so this is 2008, looked around, there's nothing out there, and I kind of just filed that away as an idea that I would, come back to. And I think, you're probably the same way. I have a lot of ideas, like, I'll be doing something like, wouldn't it be cool if? And, I think about it for a few hours and then it goes away. That's what this was at the time.
Yeah, there's definitely not 5 different box folders on my computer.
Yeah, me neither.
Projects.
I would need many, many lifetimes to just to read through my list, I think, let alone try to build them all. But I think that's nice. Like, it's you kind of let them go away, and the ones that you don't think about over and over again are the ones that weren't your idea, the idea that you should work on. Whereas this kept popping up. In 2010, I applied for a job at a company called Mozilla, which makes Firefox, and my future boss, I got the job, but my future boss asked me where I wanted to be in 5 years, and I said, I think I want to start a company. I'm not really sure what. And he pushed me a lot about it. And we talked about kind of, where I want to be in 5 years. And I brought this idea. I called it, at the time I called it Live Docs. And I just we just talking about how I thought that not only should API docs exist, but they should be collaborative, and people should be able to, almost like a wiki, and people should be able to add to it. And they should be, it shouldn't just be, locked up in code. It should be something that anyone can edit and work together on. And I described this. And, I think that's kind of a huge reason why I got the job, was because I had something where I wanted to go in a few years. And one of the things when he offered me the job that he said was, he wanted to make sure that over the next few years that I was at Mozilla, that, my path kind of pointed me towards the direction I wanted to go. And to his credit, he checked back every few months, made sure that things were going well, that I was kind of on the right path to starting a company. At this point, I didn't think that was going to be my company. It was just an idea that I had, but it kept sticking with me. I started working at Mozilla on developer tools for developers, and I just loved it. My background's programming and design, and it was kind of this perfect overlap between the two. At the end of in 2012, so this is 4 years after I had the first idea. And remember, I haven't been spending much time on this, but it's kind of been popping up.
It's been just floating in your mind.
Exactly. I decided to apply to Y Combinator. So Y Combinator is for people who don't know, a startup incubator. A lot of big companies like Dropbox and Airbnb and stuff like that have come. Reddit have come out of it. Stripe. There's a long list of companies that come out of Y Combinator. And so I applied to Y Combinator with this idea, with nothing built, just an idea. And I got an interview. And the way it works is you apply, then you get an interview, and it's a 10-minute interview, and it's terrifying because they're so good at narrowing on your weaknesses and just peppering you with questions on them. And then if you pass the interview, then it changes, but at the time it was $120,000 for 7% of your company. Not a great valuation, but then you get access to demo day. You're part of this cohort. And it's not the only way to build a company. There's, most companies don't go through Y Combinator, but I was always a bit of a Y Combinator just fan. And so I applied to Y Combinator and got the interview. I was so excited. I took a week off from work. I built a prototype of the site, found a friend to be my co-founder, and went into the interview, and it went horrendously. We did not get in, even remotely. And but at that point, I had kind of I had two things happen. One was that I knew I wanted to start a company, and I didn't want to be at Mozilla anymore. I love the people there, but I wanted to try something different. And I miss startups and startup culture and all that. And the second thing was I realized that this was a bad idea because Y Combinator said it was a bad idea. And so I gave up on the idea for a while. At this point, by the way, it was called DocHub. I kind of changed the name again.
What was the first one?
First was Live Docs, then DocHub. I think by DocHub, I was kind of trying to get a GitHub acquisition in the future. Was my ultimate goal. But
can I ask you a question?
Yeah, definitely.
I want to hear the rest of this, but I got so much. You're downloading so much.
I'm speeding through this, so feel free to interrupt.
It's so good. So here's where my head is. One, you're at an interview with Mozilla, and they ask the famous question that people ask: where do you want to be in 5 years? And I feel like so many people grapple with this, where they're like, how do I tell someone truthfully where I want to be without it being I don't want to be here?
Yep.
Or you telling someone you want to start another company is you saying, I don't want to be here in 5 years,
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
What
And
was that
I
like?
think that's kind of a big reason why I stood out. I think most people say like, well, I want to be like a engineering manager, or they don't really know where they want to go. And the answer is obviously like, well, I want to be here. But 5 years is a long time in, today's culture, the way that we look at companies, not for my parents, of course, but for people I hire. I've been at this company for 5 years, and that seems like an
Hmm.
eternity. And I still love it, but uh, I think um, I don't like people who, show up for 6 months and just jump around and are flaky. And I don't think anyone wants to work with that, because you invest so much into people and, then they leave. But you can't expect anyone to be at a company in 5 years, and you hope they will be, of course. But and Mozilla has great retention, by the way. Like, back when I worked at Mozilla, I left in 2012, and some of the people that were like had been there long before me are still there. So Mozilla does have
Mm.
this like staying power. But I don't know. I read a book recently. It wasn't without it being too political. It was an oral history of the Daily Show. It was
Sure.
basically about Jon Stewart's tenure from his start to his finish. And they didn't really get too much into the before or after him. But one thing I really loved about him was, well, first of all, like if you turn on the TV, odds are, watch a late night show. Most
Yeah.
late night shows came from the Daily
An
Show.
alum.
Yep,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
like, I don't think anyone looks down on Jon Stewart and is like, Colbert's not there anymore. They're thinking like, oh, like, Jon Stewart started this thing. And
Yeah.
I think he said this. There was this one interview where it was this woman who was working for him, and she wanted to go be a writer someplace else, and it was a good opportunity for her. And she asked to be let out of her contract to Jon Stewart, and because she was under contract and like legally couldn't leave, but she asked if she could be let out. And Jon Stewart responded that the Daily Show was his dream, not hers, and he understood. And I thought that was a really nice way to look at it. My company, Read Me, is my dream, not any of my employees, and I want them to be happy and to love it here. But this isn't their everything. At some point in time, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, me and everyone else at this company is no longer going to be here. And I want to make sure that everyone is kind of in the right direction and going where they want to go, because it just reflects well on the company too.
Sure.
That's one thing I love about like Mozilla. Google does this really well. Like there's some companies where like it emboldens the company, because the people who were at the company left and spread.
I was thinking about like if companies could be more like universities, where you treat your employees like
Yeah,
alum,
exactly.
where like there's a fine in universities it's typically 4 years,
Yep.
so there's pretty fixed. In companies it's different. Obviously, you just articulated many of the reasons why, but looking at an employee and saying we're going to go on this journey together, and for as long as you're here and you're giving us energy, we're going to give you energy.
Yep.
And at one point, one of us or both of us are going to determine that we hit a cap,
Yes.
and then like let's get you to wherever you want to be.
Yep.
And we'd love for you to be able to talk about us in the future in a really nice way.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
this is years later, and I'm still talking about that boss, and he's now director of engineering at Etsy, and it just people have long careers, and optimizing for the next 1 or 2 years is never the smartest thing. And I think I always like people with some sort of excitement or ambition around something. So that's what I ask people as well. And if they say they want to be at my company in 5 years, that's even better. But the interview process, like literally it's just sucking up if someone says they want to be at your company in 5 years, because how would they know that? I don't know if the company's going to exist in 5 years. I don't know what's going to be like,
Especially in the
5 years.
startup world.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And Mozilla was, it had been around for a long time, so it's not like it was going anywhere, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But you also, I mean, I think being your authentic and genuine self in that interview and being able to say like, I want to start a company, like that's on my mind.
Yep.
Right. And obviously it resonated with your manager because you got hired. But there isn't, I find, and correct me if your story is a little bit different, on average, that space is not created for people. I think you happened to find it and you just leaned into it, which is great.
Yeah, I think that's something that's been really lucky about my career so far, is that I never made many decisions. Like it did turn out that, I can tell a story that, for 10 years I had the same idea and like it was kind of my destiny and all that, but that's not true. That's kind of in retrospect. What is true though, is that I got really lucky where I kept going places and finding people I liked and connected with. And I've never regretted that. I've never regretted kind of like, Mozilla was not the best place for me if you think about, I want to start a startup, because Mozilla is a nonprofit. They don't make money. I mean, they make a lot of money, but they don't make money, through sales or marketing or the stuff that startups do make money through. And it doesn't directly kind of like it's not the best career move if you want to start a startup, but that's completely the exact opposite of being true, because it was the best career for me, because I got to work with people that were amazing, that were smart, that were interesting. I got to work on great products and features. And I think that sometimes people are too calculating with where they want to go. And I think maybe it was just kind of the lack of calculatingness that I had, where I had a plan, but it wasn't a strong plan. And I think that's kind of just being genuine, just going towards people and hiring people that you like, and being hired by people you like and stuff like that is kind of the best way to get your career going the right direction.
How did you? So you went to school on the East Coast.
I did indeed, upstate New York.
So how did you make that leap across the coast?
That was someone else who I was really lucky took a chance on me. I was in college and I had known how to program before this, and I went to school for computer science, and I took an intro to HTML, CSS class, and it was easy in the sense that I already knew the basics. But what I did was rather than kind of blowing the class off, I just used it as an excuse to kind of like push the boundaries a little bit and try new things I'd never done before and kind of go above and beyond. And I had a professor there, and I didn't know anything about her. I didn't know who she was, other than she was my professor. And turns out she was really well connected. And I didn't know this at the time. And she introduced me to, she introduced one of her former students to a guy who was like a serial entrepreneur who was well known, and they were starting a company. And then they started a company, and she introduced me. I wrote her a thank you note at the end of the class, and that's how I kind of like reconnected with her. Because I tend to write thank you notes to people or handwritten notes to people.
You still do that?
Less than I should.
Okay.
And less than I should. We can talk a little bit too about the one time that I do handwriting notes now around challenge coins. We should come back to that. Okay. But I should do it way more. So she introduced me to this guy, Eric, who was starting a company. I was an intern out here at that company back in 2008. And I'm so lucky that she kind of like forced me to go out of my comfort zone and end up in San Francisco, because I never would have made that jump by myself. I just literally didn't know you could apply to job. I mean, it's obvious, but like it's way easier to get out here than it seems. But yeah, I got really lucky with that.
There's always this, people talk about being lucky or fortune, and I always think if you're paying attention and if you're sort of focusing on the relationships, which it sounds like you did, things come up, opportunities arise, and when you look at it, sort of spot check it, it might seem like luck, but when you dig into it, right, like you just said it, like you went above and beyond, you pushed yourself, you had no idea sort of the connections or the relationship that this professor had, and you just kept on leaning into it, and things kept on coming out of it.
Yeah, and I think you have to be it genuinely. Like, I didn't write anyone a thank you note because I thought that I could get something out of it. Yeah. And I think that it comes off, like, I don't think anyone's good enough to fake, being genuine. So I think it has to be genuine. And, my takeaway isn't, write thank you notes to people or whatever, because when you start doing it from that perspective, it becomes a little manipulative and people can see through to that. Yeah, I think, just the more energy you put out there and the more you care and try and do your best, the more chances you just happen to get. And it's kind of just like buying more and more lotto tickets. And eventually they kind of start, cashing themselves in.
I would say I'm not in a position to write checks, in the venture capital space, but I write checks with my time.
Yep.
And knowing that not all those checks are going to get cashed, most of them won't.
Yep.
And it only takes a couple to have a meaningful impact on someone else's life or my life. So yeah, that sort of approach, and I don't write thank you notes just as sort of a counterpoint, but I have my own way of following up with people and my own style of staying connected with people. That's generated in its own way, similar opportunities or conversations. But that's a cool thread, and I love sort of looking back and like, what's the thread? How did you end up out there? And hearing that story is really interesting. And it's, I think a lot of people look at tech or Silicon Valley or SF or just the professional world in general and think that there's one blueprint that gets you where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not.
No, not at all. I think, back to what I said before, I think the closest you can get to a blueprint is not following any sort of blueprint, but kind of like that game of like hot or cold where like you close your eyes and someone's like warmer, warmer, hotter, and like you're trying to find something. I think if you treat your career kind of like that, where if something doesn't feel right to you and you don't like it, you move away from it. And if something does feel good to you and you like it, go closer to it, even if it doesn't fit some sort of strategy or blueprint or anything like that. And I think if you keep doing that, you end up where you want to be just naturally.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. But I use different language, but same exact story. Around like what brings you energy. When you pour energy into something, where do you get energy back? And you might be surprised where it comes from, but leaning into that and putting more energy into that.
Can I ask you a question? What got you into the podcast? Like what kind of, takes a lot of energy. It's a lot of energy for like me to do one episode. You do a lot of them. Like what kind of, what do you get out of this? Like, why do you like it? And how do you get into it?
I'm an executive coach. I do leadership development work. I do consulting work. And I have a team of people that I work with to help organizations and founders. And my big part of my job is meeting people and talking to people. And just like kind of anything, most conversations don't yield a monetized result, which is fine. Because I don't know what type of work I can do with someone until I get to talk to them. So my job, big part of it is meeting people. And in that meeting of people, I learn a lot. Like I'm listening to you and talking to you, and I'm learning a lot about a process or an industry or a story of like, here's another example of how someone got to where they are. And I think, machine learning and AI is designed to mimic sort of the power of our brain. And in a full circle, I'm like, okay, like the best thing I can do is continue to download and digest the human experience. And most of my friends work at companies and, aren't entrepreneurs and don't work for themselves. And so I also don't take it for granted that literally my job requires that I get to meet people. And most of my friends are at a desk or in an office and their job does not allow that. So I figured I was like, I'll start a podcast and I'll reach out to people and I'll learn more and more about the founder experience and the entrepreneurial experience. And I recorded 10 episodes, realized that I needed to edit them. So talk about time. The podcast treaded water for about 3 or 4 months until I reached out to a buddy of mine who I met at a cafe in Tel Aviv on a trip there in 2016. And I said, you make music, would you edit podcasts? And he said, I don't know, I'll try. And we tried a couple episodes and he loved it and I loved it. And then we just started rolling.
Nice.
And in 2018, I released 33 episodes. And then I had my son, who's 10 months now, and I took a big break and it's 2019 and I'm back. And the goal is to talk to people like you, Greg. I mean, like someone reached out to me and said, there's this awesome founder. Can he be on your show? And I said, 1000%. I'd love to talk to this guy. And I have Twitter conversations and interactions with people that are because of the show. The founder of Priceline and Upside, Scott Case, reached out on Twitter and he asked the same question. And I'm telling you the same answer. It's so that I get to talk to people like you.
It's a good excuse, but you're also very good at the free flowing conversation and all that. So it makes it's a good fit for you, I think.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But yeah, so let's zoom back. 2012, you leave Mozilla, you pitch Y Combinator. It's Doc Hub, I think at the moment.
Something like that, yeah, Doc Hub.
Yeah, and they say no, and you.
Yeah, I was. My takeaway was, it's a dumb idea, because I respected Y Combinator and all that, and so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to do something different. So I did freelancing for a while. I kind of just did some stuff I'm really proud of, some stuff I'm really not proud of. Nothing bad. That sounded way more way worse. I didn't do anything that I'm not proud of, but things that I wouldn't. Back to my thing before about kind of like going towards things that you like and away from things you don't like. Just working with people, because at some points I convinced myself, the way to get ahead is to work with, people, even if you don't like them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, I didn't do anything that I, actually regret, other than just regretting kind of wasting my time and energy on people that, weren't what I wanted to spend time on. That's okay because I learned what I liked and what I didn't like, and that was really important.
Yeah.
And it was really great. Like when you one of the when you I think to start a company, it's really good to work with both really great people and to steal their kind of mentalities and ideas and like how they run things. Like you don't want to reinvent the wheel each time. And it's also really good to work with people that are really crappy as well before you start
Yeah.
the company, because it makes you realize how hard it is to be a good manager, how hard it is to be a good founder, how hard it is to be a good coworker. Because when you just work with great people, which had been true about me, luckily, you almost start to think it's just, you don't have to put work into it.
Normal. Yeah.
Exactly. And, when you work with someone who's bad, you're like, oh, I need to make sure I don't do that. That's really crappy. I didn't like that. So I'm not saying go work for shitty people, but there is some silver linings around that where you realize, oh, I don't want my company to be like this. And I worked with a lot of startups that I was like, oh, going to try to avoid being like this in the future. So then,
I think that's such a good point, by the way. I just want to jump in
oh,
real quick.
definitely.
I talk to a lot of people and I coach a lot of people that are in situations that are challenging and looking for what you can take out of that challenge. What are you learning in that challenge that if you end up staying there and things get better,
Mhm.
or if you end up leaving and doing your own thing or working for someone else, or end up being a manager or a leader in your own right, you know, you're learning lessons about like how not to show up,
Yes.
and how not to be, because the impact and the
Yep.
damage. So
Yeah.
it's a good point, and I agree.
And again, you don't want to spend too much time with these people, but it's always nice to spend a little bit of time and just kind of understand things you don't like. And a lot of times, honestly, for most people I'm talking about, it's not that they were bad people or anything. It's just not what I wanted. And there's a lot of ways to build a company. There's a lot of ways to do things. And finding the right fit for you is important, as opposed to trying to just do things the way other people do it. So at this point, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I kept procrastinating by working on this API documentation thing on the side. And that's really all I cared about. And at some point, I was like, you know what? It's been a few years. I still love this idea. I've had other ideas I've loved for like a week or two. Like if I'm 5 years in and like still think this is something that the world needs, I kind of decided it didn't really matter. And what I needed to focus on was kind of products, or not, sorry, instead of like product market fit or anything, but like founder product fit and finding the thing that I could be happy with. There was much bigger markets and much bigger ideas that I kind of like toyed around with, but this was the one that like just got me excited in the morning, and like my eyes lit up when I talked about it, and I just loved it. And I think that matters so much more than finding the biggest market, because you can make a market. And as it turns out, APIs have gotten huge over the past 5 years. They went from being this like much smaller niche thing to being a much, much bigger market, and it's just going to keep growing. And I got really lucky that I just happened to find something that both my excitement and the market both were growing on. But at some point I just gave up on, trying to find something else that was a bigger market or made more sense, and just started working on this. And, I just gave into my procrastination. I was like, if I'm procrastinating on this, like this is what I want to be doing. So at this point, I was still looking for a name. I tried some other stuff like DevHub, DocHub. I don't know where I was going with it, but I found the name README. For anyone who doesn't know, since we do API documentation, every single software package, whatever that happens to mean, tends to come with a README file. It's just a description of how to use the product, how to get started. It's pretty much the first thing you look at if you're downloading new software or installing something new, things like that. So the name fit.
It's that text file that's in those blue folders if you have a Mac when you download something.
Yep, and I'm sure someone years ago called it README because it's like they're just trying to convince people to read it. They're like, read me. And it just became like a one-word phrase. And I got the domain and I was like, okay, I guess this is my name. And
did you start with a .com or did you move?
Oh, the .com was very expensive. I got the .io. The reason I thought of the name was because on Hacker News, which is a site for like people, startups and hackers and all that, someone posted, it was like, I'm giving it away for free to a good home, readme.io. IO is like it's not supposed to be for dev stuff, but it's very techy. Yeah.
It's been adopted for in-out or whatever.
Yeah. So I took it. I paid like $3,000 for it, which was incredibly expensive for me at the time because it was my personal money.
Sure.
And and then we just raised money recently, and the first thing I did was I bought the .com, and that was 170,000. So the
Oh,
price
that's
was a
not
little bit
bad as
different.
far as domains go.
Yeah, for a .com, I don't want to ever be so blasé. I'm like 170 for a URL. That's not much, but yeah, it's not. It could be a lot worse.
Well, let's go like single
Yep.
word, in the
.com.
dictionary. .coms are basically seven figures.
Yeah, exactly.
Like or flirting high six figures.
Yep. So I can't complain too much about it. It was, it was a good purchase, I think. But yeah, so .io and launched it. Put it on a few sites like Product Hunt, Hacker News. Got a lot of really good feedback.
When did you launch it?
It would have been 2014. It would have been about September 29th, 2014.
So you built this with someone?
No, by myself.
Okay, so by yourself, you're hacking away.
Yep.
It's 2014.
Yep.
You got the .io.
Yep.
You made that $3K investment, which at that time was massive, and it's still massive just in as far as like spending money in the beginning of a company.
Yeah.
Not having funding, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And so you put it on Product Hunt, which is a great way for people to discover different like products and technology that's out there.
Actually, so someone else put it on Product Hunt. I still think that I wouldn't have launched yet if it wasn't for that. In the sense that like I just constantly was like, oh, I just have like 10 more things I need to do, then I'll launch it. And that was going on for a while. So it's good that someone forced me to launch.
What do you mean someone else put it on? Were you testing it with people and then someone who you were testing it with like put you on blast?
Kind of. So I did this thing where I was playing around and I had an idea for something where it was a password field and we had a little owl. We didn't have before this, but since then he's become our mascot. And I thought it'd be really funny to have like a little animal like peek over the password field. So you typed in your username, there's a little owl looking over, and then when you tabbed the password field and start typing, he covers his eyes so he can't see the password. Yeah. And it's kind of been like copied a few times since then, and you might have seen it on Twitter since then. But we were the first people to do it, or I was the first person to do it, and it got incredibly popular. Like it was all over Twitter, and we got a ton of users that way. So that was kind of how we like went viral before we even launched, and no one cared about what we were building, just liked our login form. And someone found it through that and posted it on Product Hunt because they like saw the login page and like read more about what the product was, and then posted it.
And then
it went really well. It was just naturally the most upvoted product that day. It was, I think at that point, it was the third most upvoted that I've ever been on Product Hunt. This was a little early on in Product Hunt's time, but
yeah, for sure.
Now it's dwarfed by newer stuff, obviously. But it was it just went really well, and like I was like, oh, okay, like maybe I'm kind of onto something here, and applied to Y Combinator again. I found a co-founder. I applied to Y Combinator. At this point, we're making not much, like maybe $3,000 a month, something like that.
So what did you build in? How were you charging people? Mm-hmm. What was it like when you had the first person that paid you that you didn't know? Yeah. Maybe that was your first customer in general. Like talk about that stuff.
So the first customer in general was a guy named Derek from Notify. And I remember because he found it randomly. I'm not sure how. And this was before we launched at all. This was before Product Hunt, before anything else. I believe I know how I met him. I met him at a meetup and told him about it. And he's like, oh, we need that at my company. And so I was like, okay. And I gave him access to it. And there was no way to pay for it. And I remember him like PayPaling me money as a just kind of like I didn't ask for it. And just because he wanted to like kind of express his
support. Exactly.
And that meant a ton to me.
It's like on Wikipedia when they're like, please donate.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't begging for money. He just kind of did it on his own. And I just, that meant a lot to me. And I still, I'm still friends with him and everything through this. I'm still friends with a lot of early customers, which is awesome. He was our first customer, and that's just like, it felt great. And like, we've made so much more money since that, whatever, $10 he sent us or whatever it was back then. But I don't think any amount of money will be as exciting as that, like, first money in, where you just kind of are like, oh, people actually want this.
So when did you start asking for money? Not like, but like for the product?
Around September or so, when we launched,
September 2014.
Yeah. By then we had a way for people to pay. And when we launched on Product Hunt, maybe we had 5 or 6 customers at this point that were paying us, not a ton, but a good amount. Yeah, and it was exciting just to see the sales roll in, and it was slow, of course, but it was
Sure.
two or three a day would sign up for us. Since it's a SaaS app, so it kind of compounds. We have a monthly fee, and it's back then it was I think $14, $59, or $99. Was kind of was the price tiers. Maybe that's wrong, but it was something around there, and yeah, it was just exciting to kind of watch the numbers tick up, and every $14 more, like it was just exciting.
That's awesome. And what was like so you have your first paying customer, then you've got this, like a couple trickling in. Um, you applied to Y Combinator
hmm
with a co-founder. You got accepted. You didn't get
We
accepted.
got in, and it was because the conversation was very different. When it was just we had no customers, no product. It was a battle of opinions, and Y Combinator thought blank, I thought blank, and it's really you can't get that far. It's every answer to every question was, well, I think. But then when you're starting to make
Yeah.
money and you have customers, the answers are very different. It's well, our customers like it because of blank. And even if you say the same thing, it's so much better to have people who are
Yeah.
willing to
Even
pay
if all
for
your
it.
theories were correct.
Exactly. And anyone can make, not anyone, but it's easy to make, $1,000 or $2,000 a month. Like that doesn't mean you're gonna be able to build $1 billion company, but
Yeah.
it definitely proves that people want it. And Y Combinator, that's the thing I kind of was wrong about early on. I was like, oh, they think the idea is dumb. They didn't think the idea was dumb. They didn't care. They sat there and listened to 1,000 different ideas. Like they didn't have the ability to sit there and like decide if each one, like you do, you work with investors and stuff. Like you get a little more time to decide. YC didn't really care. They're not ideologues. They aren't like, well, we believe this. If you're able to make money and it's ethical and people seem to love it, why would they say no to it? And I think that kind of changed a lot for us. Like once we had a little bit of revenue, they're like, oh, okay, people want it. And it was as easy as that. And I kind of wish that years ago I knew that I didn't need to convince YC. I just needed to convince a customer or two, and then things would have gone a lot smoother.
Yeah. So I think that that's such a great lesson. So is this a lesson that you learned in between your YC interviews from 2012 to 2014, or is this a lesson that was codified when you went back and it was you had a different
I,
it was a different
I
context?
think it was definitely a lot of it's in hindsight. I knew I didn't want to apply to Y Combinator. So you can get into YC with just an idea. But I didn't want to apply again without having a little bit of revenue, a little bit of proof. It's tough to talk about money because I don't care about revenue in the sense I'm not like, uh, I like revenue in the sense that it's a really nice proxy for someone caring. That's not
Sure.
always true, but at least in startups, it's a nice proxy. And you can say people love us, but if they don't pay you anything, then do they really love you? Depending on the business model and all that. But since our
Yeah.
business model was a SaaS app, people had to
Yeah.
love us in the form of
Show us
dollars.
with your money.
Exactly. And I don't think you need money early on. Sometimes actually making money early on hurts you in the long run.
What do you mean?
I think, or at least focusing too much on money early on,
Mm.
in the sense that some companies, first of all, can't charge money. Like Snapchat couldn't charge money early on. Like they had to kind of be free for a long time until they could eventually make money. And maybe not the best example, but consumer apps tend to put revenue much
I
after
mean,
user
Facebook didn't make
acquisition.
money for a long time.
Exactly. Yeah.
They had to figure out how to monetize all their data.
Yep. And if you want to do like some sort of blog or podcast, for example, you can't make money early on. You have to kind of keep doing it until eventually it starts coming back to you in different ways. But with a SaaS app, I think the problem with the SaaS app isn't making money. It's I think we grew too quick early on. I think we had too many customers too early on, for example, which was cool.
This was in 2014.
Yeah.
In the big end of 2014, you think you were moving too fast.
I mean, I wouldn't say that we were making so much money that it was like, horrible, but it was just me. And we had like, at that point, like 300 customers or something. And it was just so hard to keep up with it. And we kind of had to like, I don't know, I was doing customer support and I was talking to customers and I was raising money. And it was just, it kind of, there's something nice about like not having that pressure early on where you kind of keep building and trying new things and all that. And it worked out well for us. So I have no complaints at all. I'm really excited about it.
Sure.
But
you had
I'm lucky.
like, what you're saying is like you had enough customers and revenue where like it would be ideal if you had other teammates
Yeah.
but you didn't have enough revenue to just straight up hire other people.
Yeah, we kind of hit this like, and the thing that there's really no complaints on my end of how it went. I'm really glad that some of the deals didn't work out. There's a few deals that would have been huge amounts of money, and it would have completely changed the trajectory of the company because these big companies come in and like I was sitting on meetings with like, there'd be like 14, 15 people in the meeting from this other company. And it's just me and my co-founder at the time, on our side, and it's like they have this like long list of stuff, and we would have become a very cheap consulting company for them, basically. And I think that I'm really glad none of those deals kind of went through because I think that could have changed the trajectory of the company pretty early on.
So okay, besides just saying it had changed the trajectory of the company pretty early on, what are some of the silver linings of those deals not going through? Because at the time, I imagine you weren't like, I hope this deal doesn't go through.
Yeah, I think no. There's a very few deals I was like crossing my fingers that they didn't work out. I think so it's weird how we're a SaaS app and not every company is the exact same way. But for us, the types of features that different size companies need are very, very different. And I think that it's finding your niche and also giving yourself enough wiggle room to go up and down market is really important. And it's I might regret. I'm not going to regret saying this, but I might not really believe this completely. But I do think that it's always easier to go up market than it is to go down market.
Can you explain that also?
Yeah. So I think so up market basically it's easier to charge more than it is to charge less. So there's kind of two different directions when you start a company. You either go down market, which means that you charge people a little amount of money and you have a lot of customers, or you go up market and you have very few customers, but they each pay you a ton of money. Both are very valid ways to start a company, and most companies do a combination of both of them. For us, the thing that got us traffic was we were very kind of viral in the sense that we do documentation, which is very public facing. And so if you go to Lyft's documentation or Zenefits or Intercom or Optimize, like any of these companies, and you like their documentation, you can check and be like, oh, it's README. And then when it's your turn to create documentation, you can kind of start using it. So it helped us a lot to be in a lot of different places early on. So that's why we went more down market, which means we charged less money and had more customers. And I think that left us so that as time went on, we could build new features out for these bigger customers and go more up market. But I think it's really hard to start up market, meaning that you charge very few companies a lot of money and then go down market. And there's a benefit to both. The benefit for being down market is word of mouth is more. You're out there more. Like more people see you and use you. It spreads easier because there's less friction. You don't need a gigantic sales process. People can just swipe their credit card and start using you. They don't need to go to their boss and get approval. They can just sign up for you for $14. Whereas if you're up market, the upside is that you make a lot more money easily. The downside is twofold. One is that churn is a lot more catastrophic. Like a lot of companies will have like really good revenue, but they have 3 customers, and then one of those customers leaves, and all of a sudden they have really bad revenue. Whereas that can have really happened to us because we have so many customers paying us a medium amount of money. And the second problem with going too up market too early is that you have to justify this like expense. You don't really get that same like love. You have to go through the friction's really high. You have to like convince people to use it and walk them through the process. Like that's just sales, and every company needs to do sales, but it's really nice for me. This is the way I like to build a company: is you get them to love the product first, and then sales is just a transaction for the features that they need. You're not trying to convince them to love your product. You're selling the features that they need for security or for internal reasons. And you've already gotten them to love you, and now they're just kind of like paying you more for it, as opposed to like the sales process where the seller's trying to convince someone to buy it, and that's just never a fun way to get started, I don't think, with a company.
For sure. I mean, it gives you breathing room to work.
Yes.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, but in you articulating it the way you just did, I can flash to like a dozen companies that I interact with or have interacted with where it's clear that may be the approach. And like every software company that's like, they have like $10, $20, $30, and then enterprise is just like call us.
Yes. Yep, we have that. And I think that's me though. I don't think that that's the only way to build a company. I think that's the way I
Yeah.
wanted to build a company. I have really close friends who did the exact opposite, and they went enterprise first, and revenue was great. And back to the whole, money being a proxy for people liking you. In that case, people really like them. And
Mm.
I think there's really no one way to build a company. As you've talked to a lot of founders, and
Yeah.
everyone's gonna have different opinions. So that's not. I think there's a lot of things that I am very like, this is the only way to do it. But I think for like, choosing whether or not, your price point and how to build a company, I think that's pretty flexible, and people do it differently.
For sure. And I mean, it sounds like also like your own assessments about what works and doesn't work have shifted.
Mm-hmm.
Like go back to that YC, the first interview you got. There was this sort of what I heard in your story was like there was a bit of a snub
Mm-hmm.
and an assessment that you made on the validity of your product, and that lesson and that arc over 2 years and how it shifted. What I'm curious, what's a piece of advice that you've received over the years that has been particularly impactful to you?
Ooh, good question. Um, that's a tough one. I think, I think that the advice that has always rung the most true to me, and I've gotten it from different people, and I've been lucky to find investors that endorse this view, is I just kind of spent 5 or maybe more minutes talking about like how I like to build a company, and you could have 10 different founders on it, and 10 different founders would give you different advice. And I think when you start a company, there's so many different ways to do every little thing that you need to follow your own way of doing it. If you try to copy the way that Elon Musk does something, or Mark Zuckerberg, or just this random founder that you happen to know does things, it's not always going to work well for you the same way it worked well for them, because it's kind of like there's when it comes to product development, there's kind of this mentality of don't worry about people who are copying you, because at best case scenario they can only kind of keep up with you. And as soon as they stop copying you, they don't know where to go next. They don't know how they got there. You put a lot of time and effort into your design decisions, your product decisions, and if they just copy it, they lose the hard-won lessons leading up to it. They don't understand how they got there. And I think to kind of sum up what I'm getting at is, I think that there's so many flashy things where you, for your new blog post, or see a tweet, or someone gives you advice and says, have you thought about doing it this way? Or you should do this, or why aren't you doing this? And I think it's so easy just to follow those, and it's really hard to stick to kind of your own beliefs and vision and all that. And that's really hard. Like it means losing customers. It means losing VCs, or losing out on VCs. Because you never want to be building a company that you don't understand, and that isn't kind of you like, for example, like let's say you play basketball, and you're playing in a game. You aren't making a decision every single split second. It's muscle memory. Like you spend a lot of time practicing,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
you need to have this muscle memory kind of ingrained, because when you're actually in it, you can't take a step back and think about each individual thing. You just kind of go with it. And I think it's very easy when you start a company to have a VC who says you should do things this way, and you're like, sure, I'll do it this way because you said to. But then you lose that muscle memory because you don't know what you're
Mm.
doing. You're just kind of like,
Mm-mm-mm.
and then you're just confused. You're like, well, I don't believe in. I shouldn't be doing it this way. I don't know how to do it this way. It doesn't feel right to me. And you need to kind of like have this baked in, like just confidence to a certain extent. Otherwise, you lose that muscle memory. So that was kind of a long, rambling answer to your question. But I think there's a lot of people who, the people I'm attracted to as far as VCs or employees, like they
Sure.
kind of are very confident with like, this is the way we're doing things, and we like it this way. And it might not be the only way, but it's our way. And I think that it's very easy to give up because someone, waves the check in front of you, and you're like, oh, it'd be really nice to raise money from that person or whatever. And or you hire an employee that, you're like, oh, I don't really like them, but at their last job, they made a lot of money, so they must be good. Stuff like that. And I think you kind of have to like be very, you can't look at these shiny objects because there's so many shiny objects out there.
You're asking people not to look at shiny objects in an era where there are only shiny
I
objects to
know.
look at.
Uh,
Um,
yep.
a couple things came to mind. One, have you read the book The Inner Game of
No,
Tennis?
I've not.
Okay, so it's almost verbatim this idea that you're talking about, like this idea of flow.
Okay.
And it was written in the 70s, and it's been rewritten a couple times. And Tom Brady swears by it, but it talks about the outer game, which is sort of the mechanics of your play, and then the inner game, which is sort of what you're talking about, this muscle memory.
Yep.
And when you get caught in the outer game, you are too mechanical and you can't get into flow. And when you lean into that sort of like the muscle memory and all that work that you've done,
Yep.
and you trust yourself, it's where the greatest plays come from. And when you interview, I'm gonna go back to this basketball metaphor. When players are interviewed after having an insane game, someone pops off 60 points, someone goes on a 3-point shooting streak, and they get 10 in a row. Almost always when a reporter's like, "What was going through your mind?" Almost always a player will be like, "I don't know. I wasn't even thinking." They're like, I was out of my mind, or like I was in the zone. They don't have a vocabulary to describe it because they weren't overthinking it. They were literally just doing. And I think you're so right. And in the age of, let's talk about a shiny object. In the age of like hustle porn on Instagram, it's hard to know and hard to understand what is sort of your true center when everyone's telling you that this is the center you should ascribe to. And so it's great to hear this from you. I mean, like we haven't gotten to any specific stats, but when people look you up, and we'll get to that in a second, you'll see we're talking about someone who's built a company for over 4 to 5 years, has raised millions of dollars, especially recently. I think August 2019. You had your big Series A. It takes that maniacal focus and that commitment to your core values and your approach, and getting rejected from YC and having an idea since 2008 that you said, I'm just going to keep holding on to. So yeah, I mean, I think that's great advice, and it resonates with what I hear, and it also resonates with the work I do. At our core, at our center, I think that's where sort of most of our superpowers live. But we're told to ignore it a little bit.
Yes, indeed. It's easy to get jealous of other people and say like, oh, this company raised more money than we did, or they did this shiny new thing or whatever. And kind of this like, if you're going to survive starting a company or doing anything, you just kind of have to have this like inner confidence that you believe in the way you're doing things, and keep going that way.
I think we should probably leave it at that.
That sounds perfect.
That's a good message to carry on. So, Greg, for everyone else that's listening and that will hear this, what's the best way? Where should people follow, check in with you, see what you're up to? Where should people follow along?
Definitely. I would say Twitter is probably the best way to find me. My handle is gkoberger. That's GKOBERGER. And the company's readme.com now, or .I still works, but readme.com. And if you liked the podcast, are in San Francisco, I'd always love to get coffee and stuff like that. I hear you're going to be in San Francisco next week, so if you're around, have some time, we should do something. But it's been great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Founder's Mind. Check back soon for Season 2, sponsored by Upside Business Travel. Learn more about Upside at upside.com. If you like what you're hearing, we'd love your support. Sign up to be a funder of The Founder's Mind. To support the show, you can go to the show notes or head to thefoundersmind.com and click the link Funder. To make sure you don't miss any awesome wisdom from guests and stay up to date on the most recent episodes of the show, be sure to visit thefoundersmind.com. You can also follow along on social at thefoundersmind. Last but not least, thank you to Roy Matz for the music on this show and his dope editing skills that make The Founder's Mind possible. Until next time, take care.
In the world, going through all of this insanity, and try to bring new ideas, make them a reality. Illuminate in the thoughts, make it a priority to implement what you learn. What you get is what you be. In a world full of noise, hard to find that clarity to try to lead subtly, never full of vanity, and try to change something small or try to change humanity. Power forward through the dark, Founder's Mind is what you see. Founder's Mind is what you see.